Welcome. In this video, I'll take a little bit of time and talk to you about how to play video games in the current age of gaming, the age of early access, or how we should play them, because we need to approach our gaming as much more of a long-term time investment, in the sense that we need to spread it out over a much longer period of time than we used to. The concept of early access has now been around for a bunch of years. It's been around for so long that many games have spent several years in early access before finally reaching their 1.0 versions, and many of them have also never left it at all. So I'm fairly sure that everyone watching this knows what early access titles are. But despite this very different way of releasing games, basically selling an unfinished version of the game much earlier than it would normally be considered ready for the public, we, the public, the consumers, the gamers, haven't really changed our way of playing them. I am pretty sure a lot of indie games would have never made it to any sort of release unless it was for early access. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but indie games are most of what I play. Now, one issue that has kind of bled out of early access culture and into post-release development is that even once a game is in its 1.0 version and officially released, which should offer you the entire promised experience, that doesn't mean you now have a completed static product. Now, what do I mean by this? Games have changed tremendously with subsequent patches, even historically speaking. We know that Paradox does this as pretty much its MO with its Grand Strategy and 4X titles, basically releasing a game as finished, but constantly rebalancing and patching things in and out, so much so that 1 or 2 years after its initial release, the game looks very different than what it was initially. It is, in a real sense, a very different game. Going even further back, I'm thinking of the patch that introduced synergies in the Diablo 2 skill trees. That was a massive change to how the game was played, and it was long after the game was actually released. Quite possibly the most well-known example of how games get to morph and change during early access is Darkest Dungeon. As such, I believe that we are moving into an era in which we as gamers, and me as an analyst in particular, need to go back to games every once in a while, even already fully released ones, because things can change. I have a very recent example of this with Driftland: The Magic Revival. I previewed the game when it entered early access back in 2018. It was really good, but did not have all of its playable races implemented and had no campaigns. Then I streamed the game in June of 2020 as a way of checking back on its now fully released form. Things were still good, all races were playable now, they had campaigns for almost all of them, some various balancing changes had happened in the meanwhile, but overall the game played the same. Then, about a week or so after my livestream, the developers dropped a free DLC called Nomads, which introduced an entirely new game mode while also adding and modifying your customization options for skirmish games. So what was I to do? I loved the game, so I had to get back into it and play the Nomads game mode in order to have a complete overview of what Driftland has to offer currently, because my initial video was obsolete by now. On the one hand, because I like to do my best to offer as comprehensive an analysis of a title as I can, and on the other, because this could have been a paradigm shift for the game if it wasn't a separate game mode. Kind of like what happened to Stellaris with the Cherry update, when some of the nuts and bolts of the game were fundamentally changed. So basically what I'm saying is that first impressions can be deceiving, especially when it comes to early access titles. And possibly the best example of this, but in a negative way, is At the Gates, which was released as a full game even though it lacked, and still does now after a year and a half since release, so many basic features to make it an enjoyable and balanced experience. For a more detailed breakdown of my first impression and subsequent patches, check out my At the Gates playlist. It's a great example of something that should have been an early access title, and we would have given it more leeway in regards to its many issues, because we generally do understand and expect early access titles to be lacking in features, have bugs and be unbalanced, but we also need to take it upon ourselves to make sure to check back in on those games every once in a while and see what has changed. The same title can look one way during early access, then different once it is fully released, and then be further changed by continued development via patches, updates, expansions and DLCs. A good example of this is Deep Sky Derelicts. I played this one when it started in early access, when it was rather repetitive and somewhat unbalanced, because it did not have all of its content implemented yet, and you do need a fair bit of playtesting to balance the types of games I normally play. But you could see the potential, and 2 years later, after its full release and 2 content and feature DLCs, the game is very different from what it was initially. Nothing changed in terms of gameplay, but new features have been added that expand your array of options, new content as well, not to mention things have been constantly balanced and the game is now challenging without feeling grindy, cheap or repetitive. We have to approach playing early access games differently, especially when it comes to indies. Find a developer or a title that you like and dedicate some of your game time to that title once every few weeks or months, depending on each developer's roadmap. Get involved and offer them feedback. There's nothing that indie devs love more than reading the thoughts of people playing their creations. Find video game analysts that you trust and who cover the types of games you are interested in and get their takes on promising titles. But most important of all, be patient with your early access titles. And I know patience has become something of a bad word in the era of the internet and in the era of social media especially. But give things time to sink in and internally process. Oftentimes, one's initial knee-jerk reaction to some piece of media is far more exaggerated than it should be, so allow your feelings and opinions some time to settle into conclusions that you can then formulate into constructive criticisms, not hot take hate. Now let me know in the comments how you approach early access games. Hey there dear watcher who's still watching, thank you very much for sticking around. I've recently started the Patreon page, so if you want to and can throw a couple of bucks my way to help me get more games and improve my recording setup, go on there and check out the tiers and rewards. If you can't do that but still want to help me grow my channel, please consider subscribing, turning on the notification bell, and of course, sharing the video far and wide. I've been Steven Nonsense, thank you very much for watching, see you next time and have a great rest of the day.